Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Adobe Live. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior Design Evangelist here at Adobe. Hope you're all well on this Wednesday morning, afternoon, or evening. If you are tuning in live here on Behance, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. We've got Ted and Robert, Umacorn, Jack, and Bruce, and Clever. Great to see all of you. General Kenobi. Wonderful. All right, so today is all about the selection brush in Photoshop. Relatively new tool, and I know there are a lot of questions. Similar to last week with the adjustment brush, many have asked, why is this tool necessary? Why is it in Photoshop when we have 13,426 selection tools? Why do we need one more? Well, I'll show you. But the short of it is we're trying to find ways to introduce new techniques to new users. You can continue using the ways you've been editing photos before, but if you want new ways to do things sometimes a little bit faster or sometimes a little bit more efficiently, the selection brush and the adjustment brush, which I showed last week, might help. So let's go ahead and hop over to my screen, and we're gonna actually start on Adobe Stock because I did get some questions about where to get images for some of these examples. Now, the starter file, which I'm going to show right here, and General says, your starter file will make a fine addition to my collection. Indeed, if you're watching it live on Behance, you can grab this starter file right in the description down below. But if you want to know where to get stock photos to practice on, if you don't have a collection of photos of your own, head on over to Adobe Stock. You're probably going to ask yourself, I don't have budget to purchase stock photos. Well, that's fine, my friends, because if you go to the free tab at the top, there are a lot of photos. So if you look at something like wild hair, or acne, or whatever different search results you might want, wild hair is where I found the one with the lion that we're going to be at. Is a lion, tiger? I don't know. I think it's a lion. But you can search and you get, in this case, 725 results for wild hair. Or you can just search for like portrait, something very generic, right? And you'll get 33. That seems off. Something's wrong there. But I can almost guarantee you there are more than 33 free images on Adobe Stock for portrait. I probably have something specific turned on, but there's a lot of images on Adobe Stock that you can get for free. What if I just press enter? We have over 1 million free images in this particular case. And I think I still do have something turned on that's limiting some of the results. But if you need images, there's a free section, which is wonderful. Oh, did I spell portrait? That would help. See, portrait. No, did I? That's weird. Hold on. Did I spell it wrong twice? I think I spelled it wrong twice. Or maybe it corrected. There we go. 73,000. Maybe I'll have to go back and see what I did. Did I spell it wrong twice? I probably did that. Maybe, I don't know. This is why I'm a designer and not a copy editor. Anyways, and I probably need more coffee. All right, let's hop over to Photoshop. Let's have some fun with some stock images. All right, so we're gonna start over here and we're gonna just go over this selection brush, what it is, why it's necessary. And for some of you, it may not be necessary. I wanna stress that. It's not something you have to use, but if you're a new Photoshop user or you want an alternative, right? Here it is. So this example here, it's a portrait, acne. It's probably what I looked like when I was younger, and we want to remove some of this acne. Now, there are a lot of ways we can do it, including something like the spot healing brush. Now, the spot healing brush, which you can find over to the left, you basically brush over top of an area and it removes it, right? Which is fine, and it works really well. But sometimes the challenge with this is that you have to go one by one and you don't really have a visual of what that's going to look like, right? Or all your selections. So instead, you might grab maybe the lasso tool and you might make a selection, hold down Shift, make another selection, and continue this process. That works, right? Again, I'm not saying that these older methods don't work. We're just giving you new options. But now we have our selection brush tool. Now I should also mention that with the lasso, when you make a selection, It's a very hard selection, which means the edges are hard, right? You can feather it, or you can go up to select, modify, feather over here. You can even smooth it, all sorts of different things. But you kind of have to know what feathering is. You have to know a few different things. But with the selection brush, you're given a little bit more flexibility. So with that selection brush added, and by the way, if you don't see your selection brush here, it should be within your selection tools. But you can go up to Edit, you can go down to Toolbar, and you can rearrange all of your tools, which is wonderful. Now, I will also point out that I'm currently in the Photoshop beta. It is also available in the public version of Photoshop. You don't have to use the beta. The reason I'm using the beta is for this example over here, which we're going to get to in a moment, just so I have the newer version of generative fill. I'll talk about that in a second. But anyways, we have our selection brush active, and all we have to do now is brush. Now, what you're going to notice is that first of all, it's very easy. It's very visual to create a selection, which is great, but all of them are nicely highlighted. And I can make large brush strokes, small brush strokes, right? I can also change the color. So if it's blending too much, I can change it to indigo or white or black or sea foam. That's a fun color, but he should probably see a doctor for these blue spots on his face. But you can also adjust the size and hardness. And this is, I think, where the selection brush really shines, is you can make very soft selections. So your selections don't have to be very harsh on the edges. They can be nice and soft. So I can bring that down to 0, right? And I can go down here, and you're noticing, let me actually change the color again. Let's go, I don't know, blue? Maybe magenta was the best. Nah, I don't know. The reason I can't really see it very well is because the edges are very soft. Yellow's not bad. And that's one of the really fun benefits of the selection brush, is that you can have soft edges, you can have hard edges, all in the middle, right? It's a fun tool. But anyways, I'm not going to go too deep into this particular example, but let me actually just go through and maybe add a few more over here, but you can kind of see how easy it is to make these selections. Now, these ones in particular are pretty small, but we're going to get to larger selections in a moment, right? So we have our selection, and this looks absolutely redonkulous, but we have our selection. Now, what do we do with this? Now, there are a few things we can do. We can use content aware by going to Edit, down to Fill, and then we can make sure content aware is selected and press OK. Now, even though it looks like a brush, looks like we kind of painted with yellow, it's a selection. So if I'm on the selection tool, we're going to see our brush splots, right? But if I go to any other tool, like the Move tool, we're going to see a typical selection. And because it's a typical selection, Command and Control D, or under the Select menu, you can go down to Deselect. That will deselect, our selection, right? And that looks fine, but we take a look, you can definitely see some areas where content aware, even though it's great for smaller areas, it just missed the mark a little bit, right? Down here, it might be actually better because we had a softer selection. These initial selections at the top, were a little bit harder. So that could be causing that. But we can also try out generative fill. And because we're trying to remove these objects in this particular photo, we simply need to leave the text field blank and press generate. It's going to go through that process of understanding the photo, probably understanding that we have acne selected. Now, I don't have this one in particular all selected, so I'm curious to see what it does with that. But it should do a pretty good job at removing it. And what's really nice about using generative fill for edits like this is it gives you new layers. This is kind of terrifying over here, but it gives you new layers. So you can toggle this off and on, and it's a very nice edit. Quite nice. All right, down here, selection brush again. We want to focus on this particular lion. Now, if we wanted to select and extract this lion from the background, it wouldn't be the easiest thing in the world, right? We could try removing the background. It's okay, but you're definitely noticing around the edges, we have a hard time. And you're gonna find this anytime you have hair or fur, especially if that hair or fur is slightly out of focus. It becomes very difficult, right? So let's select let's instead go for our object selection tool. I'm gonna make a very quick selection, of this object, we're going to go up to select and mask, and maybe we will increase the radius a little bit. Maybe turn smart radius on, sometimes that helps. Maybe we'll shift the edge inwards a touch. Decontaminate colors sometimes helps, but it also leaves a little bit of a halo on the layer mask. So be cautious of that, right? And then maybe we'll export it as a layer mask and press OK. Still, we have a little bit of weirdness going on. Now, let's say we also, on this particular artboard, might want very quickly to just generate a field of grass. And we'll do a photo, and we'll do some effects, maybe the hyper-realistic effect if I can find it. I can never find the height. Is it in alphabetical order? I think it is. So very quickly, and of course you can use a stock image, but let me find H. See, I can't spell on my streams. I can't find things even if they're in alphabetical order. But I'm going to generate a field of grass just to put in the background with this lion. Now, the reason I'm doing this, I want to show you how you can use the selection brush to make softer selections and then use generative fill. This is probably, okay, this one might work, possibly. It's also very large. Make it nice and small. This could potentially work. We will place this behind the lion. You can definitely tell that the selection is a little bit off, right? There's also a few things that we might want to do in order to fix this photo. First, I'm going to make sure to convert this into a smart object. So right click, and then, if I can find it, convert to smart object. And then I might want to go to, let's say, my camera raw filter. And the reason I'm doing this is so I just want to apply some blurring. Let's go to lens blur. And of course you can do, there's lots of different ways to do blurring, but I want to show you all this new lens blur that was added not too long ago. You don't have to blur certain things. You can blur everything. So it's going to go ahead and apply the lens blur. Eventually, it's thinking. I think it's using AI as well. Everything uses AI these days, but it's using AI to detect the scene. And then what we can do, we can increase the blur. Now it's usually using some sort of like depth, right? But I literally want everything blurred. So I'm going to go to refinement, blur, and literally just blur this whole thing. And I can change the bokeh. Ooh, that's fancy. Maybe I'll drop it a little bit and press OK. All right, so now we have a nice blur in the background. The tiger isn't necessarily harmonized very well, so I want to show you one more thing. Under neural filters, we have harmonization. So if I turn that on, let's see if this works. I can select another layer, let's say the field of grass, and it's going to try, sort of, right? I can reduce the strength a little bit. That could potentially work. But we still have the issue of the weird hair around the edges. So this is where the selection brush comes into play. Now, of course, again, you can use many different selection tools, but I'm going to grab my selection brush, make this larger, and I want to also set the hardness somewhere pretty low because this area here should be out of focus, right? And you can also use your right and left square bracket keys on your keyboard to make selections, and I'm just going to go around the edges. Just like that, and I can very easily add to my selection just by brushing. So I don't have to hold down any sort of button, I just have to brush. Maybe I'll go around the edges over here, and there we go. So now that we have our new selection complete, I'm gonna go to generative fill and simply press generate. And what I'm hoping happens is that it generates new hair that matches and harmonizes with the background that we placed behind the lion. Let's see what happens. All right, it's giving us a few different options. Now this definitely blends better, right? But it kind of reduces the fluffiness that we might want. And that's where you can go back and maybe we'll do fluffy hair. Fluffy lion hair, maybe. Maybe if we be more specific, it'll give us better results. I don't know, we'll see. Umacorn saying that lion needs a creatine treatment for its mane. I would agree, but I don't know what a creatine treatment is. But I would assume that would make sense. Oh, there we go. Aha. So you're seeing if I turn this off, now down here it's a little bit weird, but if I turn this off, we have some very harsh edges where it should be nice and blurred and out of focus. But if I turn this back on, it now just blends and harmonizes with the background quite nicely, right? fancy. My computer's making noises. Why is it making noises? I don't. Anyway, so we're going to move on to this example. Now, in this image, underwater, right? We might want to add something in this particular image. How do we do that? Well, we can use our selection brush and we can, bump up the hardness a little bit. We'll draw something in here and we'll type with generative fill a dolphin. Now, what we're likely going to see is we're going to see a dolphin that doesn't necessarily blend in with the environment. And that's because Photoshop traditionally didn't really know how to place a dolphin underwater. It doesn't look terrible, but it doesn't also look like it necessarily is underwater, right? We might want it to be, if we were underwater looking at this dolphin, it wouldn't look as crisp and clear as it does in this generation, right? Forget the fact that it's not a perfect looking dolphin. It just isn't, it shouldn't be this crisp and clear. So what we're gonna try instead, and I hope this works, is we're gonna go back to the selection brush, and this time we're going to experiment with the opacity. So I'm gonna drop the opacity to around, let's say 55%. Now I think, if I'm not mistaken, if you go under 50%, it's not gonna work very well at all. But so I'm gonna go around 55%, and we're gonna try to make the exact same selection, or at least close to it. And we're gonna type dolphin, and we're gonna press return. Now, after all, who puts dolphins underwater? General Kenobi says. I know, they should be in our living rooms or something. So what should happen, hopefully, is there we go. Aha, look at that, right? Again, not a perfect dolphin, but at least it looks like it belongs underwater, especially this one here, right? Is that what a dolphin looks like? I don't know. It probably does. But it looks like it's underwater, and you can experiment with the different opacities. I wish I kept the first one that we did. But in comparison to that first one, this one looks like it belongs underwater, or it's being looked at through water. Whereas the other one, it just kind of looks like it was placed on top of the water, and it just didn't belong, right? So this one definitely looks a bit better. And if I go back over here, let me do 100% one more time, just so we have two different options. Dolphin. Now, possibly, if I were to put dolphin underwater, that could potentially work, but I found it doesn't work very well. So experimenting with the opacity is going to get you much better results. And here, perfect example, right? This one here, even though it's got some volumetric lighting going on and things that I don't understand very well, it still just doesn't look like it's underwater. But this one over here, even though the opacity was set very low, basically at 5%, even though it's 55%, again, under 50%, doesn't seem to generate very well. But so around 5%, it looks like it belongs underwater, right? So if you do like 60%, 70%, it might get you different results, but definitely keep that in mind. So Marcy is saying, so much easier than using quick mask opacity method. Yes, and this is the reason that this tool exists, right? Quick mask has existed in Photoshop for a long time. And you could have done this exact method using quick mask before. But we have found that newer Photoshop users, and even some existing Photoshop users who have been using Photoshop for quite a while, had zero idea what a quick mask is. Some don't even know what a mask is. And we can't blame them, right? Some of these tools are very complicated. They might be easy for me because I've been using Photoshop for like 20 years, but for newer users, what the heck is a quick mask and why should I use it? So what we're trying to do with some of these tools is we're bringing some of that functionality out from behind the mask. God, I'm the worst. And we're making it more accessible for newer users and existing users. Let's do another example down here. We've got this soda. Great photo, but we want to add some ice. So, selection brush. Let's do the traditional method with opacity set to 100%. And we're simply going to type ice. And what we should see is ice that just doesn't look like it belongs in this particular soda. Let's see what happens. Suspense. Well, in this case, it didn't even work at all. I mean, that wasn't too bad. It tried to hide that ice behind the soda. Probably ice cubes would be a better word to use. Yeah, Marcy's saying, I did not know until I saw Jesus Ramirez use it for this purpose. Yes, so Jesus very early on did a video on using Quick Mask for different opacity levels in generative fill. And I think his video might have kind of brought it to our attention that people are going to be using it for this particular purpose. So maybe let's kind of work a selection brush in there. And of course, the selection brush serves a lot of different purposes, not just for generative fill, but for typical selections like softer selections or multiple selections, all sorts of different things, right? But anyways, let's go back. Drop the opacity to maybe 60%. And we will brush. And we'll type out. Now, before I do this, one other thing we can potentially do is we can combine this. So this is 60%, right? But maybe up here, we might want something a little bit more visible. Now we could keep it at 60%, or we can brush over top of it again to build upon it, or we can just increase the opacity. So maybe up here, we'll want maybe 90%, right? Because up here is going to be more visible. Down here should be a little bit more, reduced. Ice cubes. So that's another thing you can do. You can have some areas of your selection have a lower opacity, some have a higher opacity, some have softer edges, some have harder edges. So there's a lot of interesting things you can do to combine these techniques, right? Now it did a good job up here of adding ice cubes. Down here, it didn't do a very good job, but let's try maybe, let's say 70% down here. And maybe it's just because, this particular drink, even though I've done this in the past in my experimentations, ice cubes. It's possible that it's just too opaque, but we'll see. It should still work though. And thank you, Jack, in the chat for posting the starter file so you can dive in here and also fail at this particular photo. So this one down here kind of worked. I don't know exactly why. This is the fun about generative technology and AI. Sometimes it works great. It literally was working wonderful yesterday. And then today, sometimes it just doesn't work at all. That's just life, right? Let me try setting the hardness a little bit up, maybe bump the opacity to maybe, let's just try 90%. And if this doesn't work, then we'll move on and wrap things up because we're almost at time. Ice cubes. And you can try also things like ice cubes in soda. That could also work. Sometimes being a little bit more specific with your prompts could help Photoshop understand what's happening in the photo. Firefly requests light ice from Barista Howard. Yes. I mean, this one works a little bit better, right? So maybe it was the opacity. Who knows? Maybe the selection just sucked before. But definitely experiment. I would say this one should still require a lower opacity. So I lied. I'm going to do one more. Let's do 75%. And we'll do, in this case, we'll try like ice cubes in soda. And that will be the last one. Ice cubes in soda. Again, sometimes you have to be a bit more specific. General Kenobi says, perhaps you think you're being treated unfairly. Maybe there's someone secretly at Adobe who's watching the stream and they're just like pressing the don't work button while I'm streaming just to mess with me. I mean, here you go, right? This one's not too bad. And you can kind of see how that opacity is helping this generation. It's helping reduce the opacity of those ice cubes, placing it, almost looks like it's submerged in the soda, right? Whereas before, I don't think I have the before, but it's basically something like this, right? Where if the opacity is too high, it's going to kind of look like it's either right against the glass or not even in the soda. The bubbles help, but that's about it. So let me go back to the good one, which was this one, and zoom on out. I covered a lot today. A lot of use cases for the selection brush, photo retouching, editing your edges, adding dolphins to photos, and possibly, if the AI wonders are working, adding ice to soda. So that's going to wrap things up for me for today. Big thank you to everyone who has tuned in. We've got more content coming up in just a few moments, and I will see you all next week with another Photoshop challenge. Thanks, everyone.